The colony of New Gyeongju sat on the edge of known space, far from Earth and far from trouble. It was a farming world, quiet and green, with lavender skies that stretched on forever, and fields of alien grain that swayed in a warm wind. Families lived there because they wanted peace. They wanted a good life for their children, and for 11 years, that is exactly what they had. On the morning everything changed, a group of school children were outside on a field trip. Their teacher, a young woman named Yoon Hana, was showing them how the alien flowers opened when sunlight hit them just right. The children laughed and pushed each other, trying to get a closer look. Hana smiled at them. She loved these kids. She had left Earth to come here because she believed in building something gentle and new, far away from the noise of the old world. She never heard the ships coming. The first sign was a shadow. A massive dark shape slid across the sky and blocked the sun. Then another, and another. Hana looked up and her smile died. Those were not trade ships. Those were warships. Calvary warships. She had seen pictures of them in news feeds, ugly and sharp, like the teeth of some deep space predator. The Calvary Dominion was known across the galaxy as conquerors. They took what they wanted and crushed anyone who stood in their way. But they had never come this far into human territory before. The first blast hit the communication tower at the center of town. The explosion threw dirt and metal into the air, and the sound rolled across the fields like thunder. Children screamed. Hana grabbed the nearest ones and pulled them down into the grass. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Calvary soldiers dropped from the sky in armored pods. They were tall, gray-skinned, with 4 arms and eyes like black glass. They moved fast, and they moved with purpose. Within minutes, they had surrounded the colony's main settlement. Adults who tried to fight were shot down without a word. The Calvary did not negotiate. They did not explain. They simply took control. Sub-Commander Talik led the ground operation. He was a career soldier who had burned dozens of worlds and felt nothing. To him, New Gyeongju was just another resource extraction. The planet sat on top of a massive deposit of rare minerals, and the Dominion wanted those minerals. The fact that people lived here was an inconvenience, nothing more. Talik walked through the settlement and looked at the humans with mild curiosity. They were soft creatures, emotional. He watched a woman clutch her child and cry, and he felt the same thing he would feel watching an insect crawl across a rock. Nothing. Then he noticed the children. Small hands, nimble fingers. The mining work required delicate extraction in narrow tunnels. Adult Calvary were too large. Machines were too expensive. But children, human children, were the perfect size. He gave the order. Calvary soldiers moved through the colony and began separating children from their parents. The screaming was terrible. Mothers fought with their bare hands and were beaten down. Fathers threw themselves at armed soldiers and were killed where they stood. Hana tried to shield her students, but a Calvary soldier grabbed her by the arm and threw her aside like she weighed nothing. She hit the ground hard and tasted blood. Through blurred vision, she watched them drag the children away, kicking and crying, into gray transport cages. She crawled forward on her hands and knees. A little boy named Taman reached through the bars of the cage, toward her, his face wet with tears. She caught his fingers for just a moment before a Calvary boot kicked her hand away. They loaded over 300 children onto transport ships. The youngest was 4 years old. Before the Calvary jammed all communications, the colony managed to send one distress signal. It was broken and full of static, but it carried enough. A few seconds of footage, children in cages, the sound of crying, a voice begging for help, before the feed cut to silence. That signal traveled across space and reached a relay post where an intelligence officer named Bei Sunho was stationed. Sunho was a quiet man who spent most of his days monitoring deep space communications and writing reports that nobody read. He lived a boring life, and he was fine with that. But when the signal came through and he saw the footage, something inside him went very still and very cold. He watched it 3 times. His hands began to shake, not from fear, but from something much older and much deeper. He had a daughter back on Earth. She was 6. She liked to draw pictures of stars and tape them to the wall above her bed. The children in that footage were her age. Sunho flagged the transmission with the highest priority code the Earth Union military had, a code that had not been used in over 40 years. He attached 1 note to the file. 3 words. They took children. The message reached the bridge of the Earth Union starship Iron Cradle within the hour. Captain Kang Do-hyun was reviewing routine patrol reports when his communications officer handed him the file with a face that had gone completely white. Do-hyun opened it. He read the report. He watched the footage. He read it again. The bridge was quiet. Every officer on deck was watching him, waiting. Do-hyun was known as the calmest commander in the fleet. He never raised his voice. He never rushed a decision. He was the kind of man who played chess while his ship was under fire. He set the report down and stared at the wall for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was the same as always, low and steady. But his eyes were different. Something behind them had changed. Something old had woken up. Something that lived in every human being, but rarely came to the surface. It was not anger. Anger was too small a word for it. He opened a direct channel to Admiral Park Ji-sok at Earth Union Command. Ji-sok was 70 years old, a veteran of 3 wars who had seen more death than most people could imagine. He watched the footage in silence. When it ended, he closed his eyes and pressed his knuckles against his desk until they turned white. Then he opened his eyes and gave an order that would change the galaxy forever. "Wake the 7th Fleet," he said. "All of it. Every ship, every soldier, every gun. And send word to the 3rd and 12th. Tell them to prepare for full deployment." His aide hesitated. "Sir, that is the largest mobilization since the founding of the Union." Ji-sok looked at her. His voice did not waver. "They took our children." That was all he needed to say. The Galactic Council met in a vast chamber at the center of a space station the size of a small moon. Hundreds of species sent their representatives here to argue and trade and make laws that most of them ignored when it suited them. It was a place of politics, and politics moved slowly. Ambassador Shin Eun-ji walked into that chamber like she owned it. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a calm face that gave away nothing. She had spent 20 years in diplomacy, and she was very good at it. She could smile at someone she hated and make them believe they were friends. She could talk for an hour and say exactly nothing. She was, by every measure, the perfect diplomat. But today, she was not here to be diplomatic. She stood at the central podium and looked out at the assembled representatives. Hundreds of alien faces looked back at her, some curious, some bored, some already annoyed that a human was taking up their time. Eun-ji placed a small device on the podium and activated it. A holographic display filled the air above her. It showed New Gyeongju, the burning buildings, the dead colonists lying in the streets. And then the footage that Bei Sunho had flagged, the children being dragged into cages, crying and reaching for their parents. The sound of their screams echoed through the chamber. The room went very quiet. Eun-ji let the footage play to the end. Then she turned it off and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner. 3 days ago, she said, the Kelvari Dominion attacked an unarmed human farming colony. They killed 67 civilians, They abducted 312 children, the youngest of whom is 4 years old, for the purpose of forced labor in their mining operations. She paused and looked directly at Grand Arbiter Valesi, the ancient being who led the council. Valesi was from a species that lived for thousands of years. He had seen empires rise and fall. He was cautious by nature and slow to act. He believed every problem could be solved with enough time and enough conversation. Valesi spoke carefully. The Council extends its deepest sympathy to humanity. We propose an immediate mediation process between the Earth Union and the Kelvari Dominion, with a neutral arbitration panel to oversee negotiations for the safe return of the abducted individuals. Several other representatives nodded. A trade-focused species offered to draft economic sanctions. Another suggested forming a committee to investigate the incident. The chamber filled with the comfortable noise of bureaucracy doing what it did best, which was nothing, very slowly. Yunji listened to all of it. She stood there and let them finish, every single one of them. When the chamber was quiet again, she spoke. The Earth Union does not request the Council's permission. We are not here to negotiate. We are informing you of what comes next. She picked up her device, turned, and walked out. The silence she left behind was enormous. Elder Passan of the Marathi collective caught up with her in the corridor. The Marathi were one of humanity's oldest allies in the galaxy, a gentle species of scholars and scientists who had been studying humans since first contact. Passan was old even by Marathi standards, and he had spent his entire life trying to understand the strange, emotional, contradictory species called humans. He touched her arm with one of his long, pale fingers. Ambassador, what does the Earth Union intend to do? Unji stopped walking. She looked at Passan, and for just a moment, the diplomatic mask cracked. What was underneath was not rage. It was something colder. Something that had already made every calculation and accepted every cost. They hurt our children, Elder. There is no version of this where the Kelvari Dominion still exists when we are done. Passan watched her walk away. He stood in that corridor for a long time, perfectly still, thinking. Then he moved faster than he had moved in decades. He called an emergency meeting of every neutral species he could reach. When they gathered, confused and impatient, he said something that made them all fall silent. You need to move your ships and your people away from Kelvari space immediately. All of you. Right now. Why? Asked one of the representatives. Passan's voice was heavy with something that might have been fear or might have been awe. Because you do not understand what humans are. I have studied them for 80 years, and I am only now beginning to understand. They are not like us. They do not escalate gradually. They do not posture and threaten and negotiate. When you cross certain lines, they simply decide to end you. And once they have decided, nothing in this galaxy will stop them. They love their children the way a star loves burning. It is the core of what they are. And you have seen what a star does when it dies. He looked at each of them. Get your people out, now. Meanwhile, in the Kelvari Dominion, Warlord Drukan was not worried. He sat in his command throne on his homeworld and read the reports of human fleet movements with mild amusement. Drukan was a conqueror. He had crushed dozens of species. He understood power, and he believed that power was measured in ships and weapons and the willingness to use them. He believed humans were soft. He had watched their entertainment, their music, their art. They wrote stories about love. They cried at sad songs. They kept small animals in their homes and talked to them. How could such a species be a real threat? His intelligence officer reported that the humans were assembling a fleet. Drukan shrugged his massive shoulders. How many ships? 3 full battle fleets, Warlord. Possibly more. They are mobilizing at a rate we have never seen from them. Drukan laughed. It was a deep rumbling sound. Let them come. They will throw a few punches to save their pride. We will bloody their nose, and then they will come to the negotiating table like they always do. Perhaps we will even return some of the children as a goodwill gesture. Sub-Commander Talek, standing nearby, was less certain. He had been on the ground at New Gyeongju. He had seen the way the human parents fought when their children were taken. One woman with no weapon and no training had broken a Kalvari soldier's arm before she was brought down. A man had thrown himself onto a plasma rifle barehanded. "Warlord," Talek said carefully, "the humans fought very hard for their young. Even the civilians. Even the ones who had no chance. All species fight for their young," Drukan said, waving a hand. "It means nothing." But across human space, something was happening that Drukan could not understand, because he had never felt it himself. The news of New Gyeongju spread to every human world, every station, every ship. And it did not spread as a political event or a military incident. It spread as something personal. Every human who heard it felt it in their chest, like a hand squeezing their heart. Veterans who had not worn a uniform in 30 years showed up at recruitment offices. Civilian shipyards stopped building trade vessels and started building warships. Engineers worked through the night. Factories ran without stopping. No one had to be convinced. When a reporter asked a retired soldier why he had re-enlisted at the age of 62, the old man looked into the camera and said 3 words. They took children. That was enough. Across the galaxy, species watched the human mobilization with growing unease. They had seen humans fight before, small conflicts, border disputes, nothing serious. This was different. This was a species that had decided, all at once, without debate and without doubt, that something unforgivable had been done. And the galaxy was about to learn what humans did about unforgivable things. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Kalvari space, and it was the largest armada the galaxy had ever seen a single species assemble. 3 full battle fleets, over 900 warships, carriers, destroyers, cruisers, frigates, and behind them, wave after wave of troop transports and medical ships. They filled the scanners of every Kalvari border station like a wall of iron moving through the dark. Captain Kang Do-hyun stood on the bridge of the Iron Cradle at the front of the formation. He was calm. He had not raised his voice once since receiving the report about New Gyeongju. He did not need to. The people around him could feel what he was feeling, the same way you could feel the heat from a fire without touching it. He opened a communication channel to the nearest Kalvari border station. His message was simple, and he said it only once. This is Captain Kang Do-hyun of the Earth Union. You have 6 hours to return every human child alive and unharmed. If you do not, we will dismantle your civilization, system by system. There will be no second warning. The message was relayed to Warlord Drukan. He listened to it in his command chamber, surrounded by his generals. For the first time, there was a small crack in his confidence. The size of the human fleet was unexpected. But Drukan was a proud creature who had never backed down from a fight in his life, and he was not going to start now. Not in front of his officers. Not over the demands of a species he considered beneath him. Ignore it, he said. Reinforce the border. Show them we do not bend. The 6 hours passed. Do-hyun checked the time. He looked at his bridge crew. Every one of them looked back at him, and not a single face showed doubt. He gave the order with 3 words. Begin the operation. The human fleet moved forward, and the Kalvari learned in a single hour what it meant to fight a species that was not angry, but had gone past anger into something much worse. The humans were precise. They did not fire wildly. They did not waste shots. Every missile, every energy blast, every boarding action was calculated to cause maximum military damage and minimum civilian harm. The first Kalvari border fortress, a massive armed station bristling with weapons, lasted 11 minutes. Human electronic warfare teams blinded its sensors. Bomber wings hit its shield generators in coordinated strikes. Then the heavy cruisers opened fire and tore it apart, piece by piece. Escape pods were allowed to launch. Civilian transports were waved through. But every gun, every launcher, every military system was destroyed with the kind of calm, methodical thoroughness that made the watching galaxy go very quiet. Station after station fell. Shipyards that had taken the Calvari decades to build were reduced to floating debris in hours. Weapons platforms were surgically cut apart. Military supply lines were severed. The human fleet moved through Calvari border space like a surgeon cutting away diseased flesh, removing everything that could fight back, while leaving everything else untouched. This precision was what terrified the galaxy most. Species that watched the battle footage expected to see rage. They expected wildfire, chaos, the blind destruction of an emotional species lashing out in grief. What they saw instead was something far more frightening. They saw a species that was fully in control of itself, that had channeled every drop of its fury into cold, perfect efficiency. Grand Arbiter Valesi watched the reports from the Galactic Council chamber, with his ancient hands clasped together. He had seen wars before. He had seen species try to destroy each other in fits of hatred, but he had never seen anything like this. The humans were not trying to destroy the Calvari. They were trying to remove the Calvari's ability to ever do harm again. And they were doing it with a terrifying calmness that suggested they had thought about this very carefully and had decided exactly how much force was needed, and not one bit more. He sent an urgent message to Admiral Park Ji-seok. Admiral, the Council begs you to consider a ceasefire. Mediation is still possible. The Calvari can be reasoned with. It was one line long. Return the children. Valesi stared at those 3 words for a long time. He was beginning to understand something that Passan had tried to tell him. Humans did not have complicated demands. They did not want territory. They did not want resources. They did not want power over the Calvari. They wanted their children back. And until that happened, nothing else mattered. Nothing else existed. On the occupied world of New Jiangju, Sub-Commander Talek was receiving reports of the fleet's advance, and each one was worse than the last. The border was gone. The Calvari defense network was collapsing. Human ships were already in the mid-systems and moving fast. Talek paced the floor of his command center and tried to think. He still had the human children, over 300 of them, held in mining camps across the planet. They were his leverage, his bargaining chip. If he threatened to harm them, the humans would have to stop. They were emotional creatures. They would not risk their young. He began drafting a message to the human fleet. A senior Calvari officer named Gorath, old and scarred from many campaigns, watched him and then stepped forward. Sub-Commander, do not do this. Talek looked at him. They are assets. We use what we have. Gorath shook his head slowly. I have fought many species. I have seen what desperation looks like and what resolve looks like. The humans are not desperate. They are resolved. If you threaten their children, you will not slow them down. You will remove the last thing holding them back. He leaned closer. Right now they are destroying only our military. They are letting our civilians live. They are letting our escape pods go. They are fighting with rules. If you use those children as shields, they will stop following rules, and we will not survive what comes after. You are afraid of them. Yes, Gorath said simply. And if you were wise, you would be too. Talek hesitated. He looked at the reports again. Every few minutes, another Calvari installation went dark. The humans were coming, and they were not slowing down. He put the message aside. He did not send it, but he did not release the children either. Meanwhile, aboard a medical frigate that trailed behind the main fleet, Dr. Yoon Hana was preparing. She was no longer the gentle teacher who had shown children alien flowers on a quiet morning. She was still gentle, yes. She still spoke softly, and her hands were still careful and kind. But there was something new behind her eyes. She had treated the survivors who escaped New Gyeongju. She had seen the bruises on the adults. She had listened to a mother describe watching her 7-year-old daughter dragged away in a cage. And something in Hana had changed permanently. She had volunteered for the rescue mission. She ran her medical teams through drills until they could set up a field hospital in under 4 minutes. She studied Kalvari biology so she could treat their wounded too, because she was a doctor, and that is what doctors did. But every night, she looked at the star map and found the dot that was New Gyeongju, and she whispered the same thing. "We are coming. Hold on. We are coming." Intelligence Officer Bae Sun-ho worked around the clock, feeding information to the fleet. He had intercepted Kalvari communications, cracked their codes, and mapped every mining camp on New Gyeongju. He knew where the children were being held. He knew guard rotations. He knew which buildings were reinforced and which ones were not. He built a rescue plan so detailed that every Marine who would set foot on that planet would know exactly where to go and exactly what to do. When Captain Do-hyun reviewed the plan, he looked at Sun-ho for a long time. "You have been awake for 3 days. Yes, sir. When this is done, you will sleep. When the children are safe, I will sleep." Do-hyun nodded. He understood. They all understood. The fleet pressed forward. Behind them, the Kalvari border was a graveyard of broken stations and silent shipyards. Ahead of them, New Gyeongju waited. And in the mining camps on that stolen world, 312 children waited too, not knowing that the largest military force their species had ever built was coming for them. The drop pods fell through the lavender sky of New Gyeongju like iron rain. They came at dawn, hundreds of them, punching through the atmosphere in streaks of fire and smoke. Inside each pod were human Marines in full combat armor, silent and focused, their weapons loaded and their orders clear. Secure the colony, neutralize all Kalvari military forces, and above everything else, above victory, above survival, above all other objectives, one order burned brighter than the rest: find the children. The Kalvari garrison on New Gyeongju had 3,000 soldiers. They were well armed and well positioned. Sub-Commander Talik had spent the last several days fortifying the settlement, setting up defensive lines, and preparing for the assault he knew was coming. He believed his forces could hold long enough for reinforcements to arrive from the Dominion core worlds. He was wrong about the reinforcements. The human fleet had already cut the Kalvari Dominion in half. Every ship that tried to reach New Gyeongju was turned back or destroyed. Talik was alone. He was also wrong about holding. The Marines hit the ground and moved with a speed and coordination that the Kalvari had never seen from any species. They did not charge blindly. They did not waste themselves against fortified positions. They flowed around defenses like water, finding gaps, creating openings, supporting each other with a precision that came from years of training and something more, something that training alone could not explain. Every Marine on that planet knew why they were there. Every single one of them had seen the footage. Every single one of them carried it in their chest like a burning coal. And it did not make them reckless. It made them unstoppable. Kalvari soldiers who had fought a dozen campaigns and never known fear began to feel it for the first time. They did not hesitate. They took ground, and they held it, and they kept moving forward, no matter what was thrown at them. A Kalvari officer later described it in his surrender testimony. It was like fighting the tide. You could push it back for a moment, but it always came. It always came. Officer Bae Sun-ho was on the ground with the first wave. He had refused to stay on the ship. He had built the rescue plan, and he intended to see it through personally. He led a strike team of 12 Marines straight toward the largest mining camp. the one where intelligence indicated over 150 children were being held. They fought through 2 kilometers of Kelvari-held territory. Sun Ho was not a frontline soldier. He was an intelligence officer who spent most of his career behind a desk. But he moved through that battlefield like a man who had already decided that nothing in the universe was going to stop him from reaching those children. A plasma bolt grazed his shoulder and burned through his armor. He kept moving. A wall collapsed in front of him, and he climbed over it. He kept moving. They reached the mining camp at mid-morning. It was a gray, ugly building surrounded by fences and guard towers. The Kelvari guards inside saw the Marines coming, and most of them made a quick, smart decision. They put down their weapons. The few who did not were dealt with in seconds. Sun Ho blew the lock off the main door and stepped inside. The smell hit him first. It was the smell of too many people in too small a space, without enough food or clean water. The light was dim. The floor was cold stone. And along the walls, huddled together in groups, were children. Human children. Dirty, thin, some of them bruised, some of them bandaged with torn strips of cloth by the older ones, who had tried to take care of the younger ones. They were between the ages of 4 and 14. They looked up at the Marines with huge, frightened eyes. Some of them flinched and pressed back against the walls because they had learned in the last week that large figures in armor meant pain. Sun Ho stopped. He looked at them. Something cracked inside his chest that he knew would never fully heal. He reached up slowly and removed his helmet so they could see his face, so they could see that he was human, so they could see that he was crying. He knelt down. A small girl in the front row stared at him. She was maybe 5 years old. Her clothes were torn, and there was a bruise on her cheek. She was shaking. Sun Ho held out his hand, palm up, and spoke softly. "My name is Sun Ho. I am from Earth. We came to take you home." The girl looked at his hand. Then she looked at his face. Then she started to cry. Not from fear, but from relief. And she stumbled forward and grabbed his hand with both of hers, and held on like she would never let go. Behind her, more children began to cry. Some of them ran to the Marines. Some of them just sat where they were and sobbed because they were too exhausted to stand. The Marines, these trained soldiers who had fought their way across a planet that morning, knelt down in the dirt and held children and let them cry. More than a few of the Marines were crying too. Dr. Yoon Hana arrived with the medical teams 30 minutes later. She walked into that building and she did not waste a single second. She moved from child to child, checking injuries, giving water, wrapping wounds, speaking in a voice that was warm and steady and calm. She had prepared for this. She had trained for this. But nothing could have prepared her for the way a little boy grabbed her sleeve and whispered, "Are you real? Are you really here?" she asked. "I am really here," she said, "and I am not going anywhere." Outside, the battle for New Gyeongju was ending. Kelvari forces were surrendering in growing numbers. Sub-Commander Talik tried to flee the planet in a stolen shuttle. He was intercepted by a Marine patrol craft, brought down without being killed, and taken into custody. The Marines who captured him did not beat him. They did not hurt him. They put him in restraints, and they read him his rights under Earth Union military law, and they treated him as a prisoner of war. This confused the galaxy more than anything else. Species that had watched the human advance, the cold destruction of the Kelvari military machine, the relentless march across New Gyeongju, expected the humans to execute Talik on the spot. They expected revenge. They expected cruelty. Instead, they saw due process. They saw restraint. And they did not understand. While treating a young Kelvari soldier who had been wounded in the fighting, barely more than a boy himself, she saw the fear in his eyes. He expected to be killed. She cleaned his wound and bandaged it with the same care she gave to the human children. The young Kelvari stared at her. "Why?" he asked. Hana looked at him. "Because we are angry. We are not monsters. There is a difference, and if we forget that difference, then we lose the thing that makes us worth fighting for." Across Kelvari space, the Dominion was collapsing. The human fleet had reduced their military capability by over 80%. Their shipyards were gone. Their weapons platforms were gone. Their fleet was scattered and broken. Warlord Drukan sat in his command chamber and watched his empire fall apart, and could not understand how this had happened. He had conquered species that were stronger than humans. He had crushed civilizations that were older and more advanced. How had these soft, emotional, sentimental creatures destroyed everything he had built? His own generals turned on him. They dragged him from his throne and locked him in a cell, and sent a message to the human fleet offering unconditional surrender. They did not do this because they believed in justice. They did it because they wanted to survive. Admiral Park Ji-sok received the surrender. He also received a message from the ground on New Gyeongju, from Sunho himself. All children recovered, alive. Repeat, all children alive. Ji-sok sat in his quarters alone after reading those words. He was 70 years old. He had buried friends. He had given orders that sent people to their deaths. He had carried the weight of command for decades without bending. But when he read those words, the old admiral put his face in his hands and wept. From relief so deep, it felt like his bones were dissolving. His aide found him like that a few minutes later. He straightened up, wiped his face, and cleared his throat. "Signal the fleet. Begin withdrawal from all Kelvari civilian zones. Military targets only, until the surrender is formalized. We are not occupiers. We came here for our children, and our children are safe." The transports left New Gyeongju that evening. Hana rode with the children. She held the smallest ones on her lap, and told them stories about Earth, about oceans and mountains and blue skies. Sunho sat across from her, his wounded shoulder wrapped in a bandage, watching a little girl sleep against his arm, with her fingers still curled around his hand. Across human space, the news broke. The children were coming home. And on every human world, people cried. 3 weeks after the last Kelvari warship surrendered, Ambassador Shin Unji walked back into the Galactic Council chamber. She wore the same dark suit she had worn the first time. Her hair was pulled back the same way. Her face carried the same calm expression. But the room she walked into was a very different room. The last time she had been here, the assembled species had looked at her with polite disinterest. Some had been bored, some had been annoyed. A few had whispered to each other that humans were overreacting, that the loss of a small colony and a few hundred children was hardly worth disrupting galactic politics over. No one was whispering now. Every seat was filled. Every representative was present. And when Unji walked to the central podium, the chamber was so quiet she could hear her own footsteps echoing off the high walls. Every set of eyes, hundreds of different shapes and colors and sizes, was fixed on her. She saw fear in some of them, respect in others, and in a few, something that looked like understanding. She placed her hands on the podium and spoke. 3 weeks ago, I stood here and showed you footage of human children being taken from their homes and put in cages. I asked for nothing. Some of you offered mediation. Some of you suggested committees. Some of you told us, privately, that we should accept reparations and move on. She paused. The silence was absolute. We did not accept reparations. We did not move on. We went and took our children back. And in the process, we disassembled the military infrastructure of the Kelvari Dominion so thoroughly that they will not be able to threaten anyone for a very long time. She let that settle. Then she continued. I am not here to apologize for what we did. I am not here to justify it. I am here to make sure it never has to happen again. She activated the holographic display, and a document appeared in the air above her. It was titled Galactic Resolution 7701, and it was written in clear, simple language that left no room for interpretation. The resolution stated that the deliberate targeting, abduction, enslavement, or harming of any species young would be classified as the highest category of offense recognized by the Galactic Council. The government responsible would be held collectively accountable, and the aggrieved species would be sanctioned to respond with whatever level of force they deemed necessary, without restriction and without requiring council approval. Unji read the key passages aloud. When she finished, she looked up. This resolution was co-authored by the Mirathi Collective and is supported by 37 species. I am presenting it for a full council vote. Grand Arbiter Valesi leaned forward in his ancient chair. His voice was careful, measured, the voice of someone choosing every word like a surgeon choosing where to cut. Ambassador, this resolution effectively grants any species the right to wage unlimited war in response to harm against their young. That is an extraordinary power to codify into galactic law. Yunji looked at him. Yes, it is. And if the council does not pass it? Yunji tilted her head slightly. The smallest smile touched the corner of her mouth. Not warm, not cold, just honest. Then humanity will enforce it anyway, on our own, without restriction and without apology. This resolution is not a request, Arbiter. It is a courtesy. We are offering the galaxy the chance to stand with us rather than watch from the side. The chamber was quiet for a long moment. Then Elder Passan of the Marathi stood. He was old and frail, and his movements were slow. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. I will say something that many of you are thinking, but none of you want to admit. What happened to the Kalvari was not a tragedy. It was a lesson. And the lesson is simple. There are lines that cannot be crossed. We all know this. We have all felt it. Every species in this room has young. Every species in this room knows what it would feel like to have those young taken and harmed. The humans did not do anything that we would not have wanted to do. They simply had the strength and the will to do it. He looked around the chamber. I have studied humans for 80 years. I have read their history. I have learned their languages. I have watched their art and listened to their music. And I will tell you what I have learned. They are not the strongest species in this galaxy. They are not the fastest or the most advanced. But they love their children with a ferocity that has no equal in any species I have ever studied. It is the foundation of everything they are. Their civilizations, their laws, their wars, their art, all of it grows from that single root. Harm their children, and you are not attacking their military or their economy. You are attacking the thing that makes them human, and they will burn everything to protect it. He sat down. The chamber remained silent. The vote was called. One by one, species registered their position. The first few votes came slowly, cautiously, then faster, then in a flood. When the count was finished, the result was displayed in the air above the podium in glowing numbers. Unanimous. Every single species voted in favor. Not one voted against. Not one abstained. Valesi stared at the result for a long time. Then he looked at Unji and dipped his head in what might have been respect, or might have been surrender, or might have been both. Resolution 7701 is adopted into galactic law, effective immediately. Unji nodded. She did not celebrate. She did not smile. She gathered her things and walked out of the chamber the same way she had walked in, straight-backed and calm. Passan met her in the corridor again, just like before. This time he did not ask what humanity intended. Instead, he said something that Unji would remember for the rest of her life. I have spent decades trying to understand what makes humans dangerous. Your adaptability, your creativity, your stubbornness, your numbers. I considered all of these, but I was wrong. It is none of those things. Then what is it? Unji asked. It is that you love your children more than you fear death, Pasan said. And that makes you capable of absolutely anything. Unji looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "Thank you for standing with us, Elder." "I stood with you because you were right," he said, "and because I never want to see what happens if someone is foolish enough to make you do this again." Months passed. The galaxy settled into a new shape. The Kelvari Dominion still existed, but it was a smaller, quieter thing, stripped of its military and governed by a new council under galactic supervision. War criminals, including Subcommander Talek, were tried in open courts. Talek was sentenced to life imprisonment. Warlord Drukan, deposed by his own people, died in a prison cell, alone and forgotten. On the former Kelvari worlds, something unexpected happened. Dr. Yoon Hana stayed behind. She set up medical clinics, not just for the remaining human aid workers, but for Kelvari civilians. When a journalist asked her why she was helping the species that had stolen human children, she looked at him like the question made no sense. "Because they are children," she said. "That is the whole point. That was always the whole point. We did not fight because we hate the Kelvari. We fought because children were hurt. If Kelvari children need help now, then we help them. Otherwise, what were we fighting for?" The clip spread across the galaxy. It was translated into 400 languages, and it did more to explain humanity to the rest of the universe than any diplomatic speech or military victory ever could. On Earth, Captain Kang Do-hyun resigned his commission. He said he had done what he needed to do, and now he wanted to be quiet for a while. He moved to a small house near the coast, and spent his days walking on the beach and reading books. He did not give interviews. He did not write a memoir. He simply disappeared into an ordinary life. One afternoon, a ceremony was held at the rebuilt colony of New Gyeongju, a memorial for the 67 people who had died in the attack. Do-hyun was invited, and he went, wearing civilian clothes. He stood at the back of the crowd and listened to the names being read. When the ceremony ended, a small girl broke away from her family and ran toward him through the grass. She was maybe 6 years old now, a little taller than she had been, with a new front tooth growing in. She was one of the children who had been rescued. She recognized him from the news feeds. She ran straight into his legs and hugged him with both arms. Do-hyun looked down at her. For a moment he did not move. Then, slowly, he knelt down and picked her up. She put her small arms around his neck and whispered, "Thank you for coming to get us." And for the first time since the war began, Kang Do-hyun smiled. Far away, in a university on a world that humans had never visited, a Marathi historian completed an entry that would be read by scholars for centuries to come. The entry was short, as the best histories often are. After the Kelvari incident of the human year 2487, Galactic Resolution 7701 was enacted, granting universal protection to the young of all species. In the centuries that followed, the resolution was never tested. No species ever deliberately harmed a human child again. This was not because the law forbade it. Laws can be broken. It was not because humans were feared, though they were. It was because every species in the galaxy had seen, clearly and unforgettably, what happened to the last civilization that tried. The Kelvari had learned a truth that was older than space travel, older than civilization, older perhaps than language itself. That there is no force in the universe more dangerous than a parent coming for their child. And the humans had proven, beyond any possible doubt, that when it came to their children, they would cross any distance, fight any enemy, bear any cost, and never ever stop. The historian saved the entry and closed the file. Outside the window, the stars burned on, steady and eternal, the way they always had. And somewhere among them, on a small blue world circling an ordinary sun, children played in the sunlight, and laughed, and did not know that an entire galaxy stood guard around them. They did not need to know.